Hello everyone and welcome! In today's video, I'm building a 1/25th scale RC replica of one of the most iconic TV show cars ever, KITT from Knight Rider. The car is a modified black 1982 Trans Am with some spectacular abilities. While some of the on-screen aspects of the car, such as the self-driving abilities, super pursuit mode, and overall sentience of KITT is a little hard to replicate in my tiny RC version, this model will feature a shallow interior and functional scanner light. I used a 1/25th scale plastic model kit and one of our FFR SC1 chassis kits to bring this car to life in miniature size. I'll be showing the entire build process from start to finish, so without any further introductions, let's get this build started. We'll start by having a look at the model kit I'll be using for this build, which is what you see here. This Knight Rider kit from MPC will be perfect for this project, as other than the scanner light and the RC chassis, basically everything I need to build a KITT replica is right here. As I get the model unboxed, and as you'll see later on throughout this video, while overall this is a very good model, there's a few things I'm not a big fan of. On that note, if you want to build a KITT replica of your own, there is likely a better option out there, and that's using a model kit from Aoshima, as not only do they have a wider variety of KITT versions, like versions from different seasons or the Super Pursuit mode, but those are more modern kits with better molded parts, and it seems a bit more detail. There's a couple catches though. One is that those kits tend to be more expensive, and most prominent with this project, the Aoshima kits are 1/24th scale, while the AMT and MPC 3rd Gen Camaro and Fireburn model kits are 1/25th scale. Therefore, the Aoshima kits are too large for the particular chassis kit I'm using. I know it doesn't sound like much of a difference, but it's enough that the Aoshima body just won't fit the chassis. It's for those reasons that this project requires this MPC version. However, as you'll see, this kit isn't bad overall. Expect some minor inaccuracies though, such as the fenders, which don't have any vents like KITT or a factory 82 Trans Am would have. This is a minor but slightly unfortunate inaccuracy with this model. Fit and finish is pretty much what you would expect from an older tooling MPC kit, but with some work, it all goes together quite well. I'll start this build by working on the body. As you can see, there's a number of imperfections such as this that I want to remove. These early steps of removing mold lines and other imperfections can be tedious, but it helps with the final look of the finished car. There are also some emblems on the fenders and B-pillars that aren't seen on KITT, so I removed them with a bit of sanding. There's quite a bit of flashing on some of the parts. That's what you see here on the edges of this rear bumper. It doesn't look good, but it's super fast and easy to remove simply by using a sharp hobby knife. As I mentioned, this KITT replica will have a functional red scanner light, much like the real thing. This is made possible thanks to this light kit from Evan Designs. It's very cool looking, but these lights are tiny, and I knew installing these might be a bit tricky. To hopefully make things a little easier, I designed and 3D printed a piece that will fit in the opening on the front bumper and will hold each of the individual LEDs. It was still a pain to try to get the glue to work on such tiny lights, and of course making sure each of the 6 LEDs are in the correct order, but in the end it worked out. I cut a small piece of clear plastic and tint film to go over top, then I cut an opening on the body large enough for the scanner to fit into. It turned out looking really cool. However, next time I think I'll paint the mount chrome rather than black to hopefully spread the light a little bit more, but other than that, it's a very cool effect. I continued by test fitting the taillights and windows. It's always best to do this early on rather than wait till the car has been fully painted and then find out something needs to be sanded or modified for that part to fit. Of course, sometimes that still happens anyways. I think test fitting is especially important when building older model kits such as this one, which usually requires some tweaking to get everything to fit well. To help with primer adhesion, I scuffed the surface of the body and some of the other exterior parts with some sandpaper before washing each part thoroughly. I then glued on the bumpers and hood, making sure they line up well. Once that glue dried, I applied a few light coats of primer. The primer helps identify any parts of the body that need some more work, and it will also help with paint adhesion. After letting the primer dry, I sand it with some 800 grit sandpaper. It may not be pretty, but the body is now ready for paint. With the body well on its way, I'm switching gears now and focusing on the RC chassis. The chassis I'm using for this build is one of our FFR SC1 Builder Series kits, sized specifically for certain AMT and MPC Firebird and Camaro model kits. It will fit this MPC Knight Rider model kit perfectly, and even includes some OEM-style Pontiac bowling ball wheels, though admittedly somewhat compromised in accuracy, so they are compatible with this functional RC chassis. This is the same chassis kit that I used for that 1983 Camaro Z28 project from last year, which some of you may be familiar with. If you'd like more information about this kit, or would like to order one for yourself, I've included some links below in the description. I started out by assembling the tiny rear live axle. This chassis uses a front motor, rear wheel drive configuration, just like a full-size Trans Am. From there, I installed the rest of the drivetrain and assembled the front steering and suspension assembly. After that, there's only a few little things left to install before this chassis is complete. Of course, with the chassis now done, I couldn't resist doing a quick mock-up. I can already start to daydream about how this finished car is going to look, but here's where the fun really starts. I've got to install the remaining electronics while still allowing enough room for some form of interior. In addition to that, I've also got to make some body mounts that will connect the Firebird body to the chassis. That's going to be the difficult part of this build, so let's get it done. The chassis is complete, but to get it rolling on its own, a few additional components will need to be added. These include the ESC, receiver, and battery. Getting these electronics installed while still having room for an interior will be a little challenging and will require some creativity to get everything to fit. Doing things such as removing the receiver case and adjusting the length of the wires on the ESC so they are only just as long as they need to be will help. Of course, it's always a good idea to test everything out before mounting the electronics, as I'm doing here. Here's what I've got so far. It's decently tidy and should have enough room for a shallow interior. I did a quick test drive just to make sure everything is functioning as it should. While smaller electronics than the ones I have here can be used, as will be seen on an upcoming project that will be posted on this channel, these larger, more conventional components still have a few advantages, such as better performance, as this ESC can be used with a 2S LiPo battery, and the plugs, although relatively big, are way easier to connect compared to soldering magnet wire to tiny boards. Both more conventionally sized and micro-sized electronics will have their own advantages and disadvantages, so you'll need to decide what you want to prioritize with your build before you begin. The chassis is wired up and working as it should, so let's move on to the next step. I want this car to have some form of interior, but obviously some modifications are going to need to be made to the interior tub. This is usually one of the more challenging parts of a project like this, and believe me, it took a lot longer than this highly condensed footage would have you think. Basically, a lot of cutting, then test fitting, and repeating that over and over again. In the beginning, I did try to keep some of the rear section of the interior intact, but it just didn't leave enough room for the battery, so some serious hacking commenced. Along with the interior, I also started working on the body mounts. I'm using the posts and magnets included with the chassis kit. I found that putting 2 posts underneath the center of the interior and 1 under the hood held the body on nicely. Later, I'll be gluing those upper magnets to the underside of the body and interior, but not before I secure the interior piece into place. With these magnetic body mounts in place, it's super easy to remove and install the body. As you'll see, I decided to essentially wall off the back section of the interior from the B-pillar's back and black out the rear window so you won't be able to see the battery below. This will allow plenty of room for the battery in the rear while hopefully overall maintaining a nice scale appearance. It's certainly a bit of a compromise, but in the end, I think it turned out looking pretty good. As cool as they are, these 80s F-bodies aren't the easiest for these types of projects, as they aren't super large and lack a trunk space to hide the battery and other electronics in. In contrast, I'm also working on a 70s Ford Gran Torino build, which I'm sure a video on that will be making its way onto the channel eventually, but it's the same scale as this car and has relatively large size electronics and a similar chassis setup, but just being a big personal luxury coupe with giant engine compartment and large trunk space makes a huge difference with getting everything to fit easily. As you can see though, after a lot of test fitting and making tweaks here and there, the interior is starting to take shape. Of course, a few modifications need to be made, such as making the seats much shorter with the floor now raised. I needed to chop them down so they'll fit. Hopefully Michael doesn't mind the severe lack of legroom. At this point though, all of the interior parts are ready for paint, as is the body. After washing each of the parts, I used some spray cans to paint them. While I'm aware that much of the interior on the real car, such as the carpet, was tan, I've chosen to make much of the interior black to help hide the mods that I've made to it. While those parts dried, I painted all of the exterior pieces, such as the body, the wheels, and the spoiler. With the black paint really showing any dust, dirt, or other imperfections, I did a bit of wet sanding to help remove those spots before applying the clear coat. There aren't many details that need to be added to the body as far as paint or graphics go, really just the side marker lights, door handles, and keyhole. While personally I prefer the two-tone look of a factory Trans Am over KITT, certainly no complaints when it comes to painting this body. There's no masking, tiny emblems, or giant decals to deal with. Very easy. It's certainly not a perfect paint job by any means, but overall not too bad. I'll go ahead and turn my attention back to the interior. The paint looks good, so after it dried, I applied the water slide decals. Unfortunately, these water slide decals were toast. Despite this being a somewhat recent re-release, not new, but I didn't think it was too old, the waterslide decals almost wanted to disintegrate and had zero adhesion. Unfortunately, waterslide decals do have a shelf life. I've gotten lucky with building decades-old kits and the water slides are still usable, while some kits only a few years old can have issues. I didn't think I need to worry about these, but apparently I should have. I did my best to gently lay down some clear to help keep them from just falling off the dash, which was kind of successful, but I ended up needing to improvise a bit with some detail painting. That's just how it goes sometimes. Fortunately, the rest of the interior went together much smoother. It may not be perfect, but it looks alright overall, and once installed, it should help with the overall look of the finished model. Speaking of finished model, with the paint now dry, it's time to start assembling this car. I did quickly do a little polishing on some of the larger flat areas of the body, just to improve the finished look a bit. The polishing helps to remove some minor imperfections. Of course, some detail work is required to get these wheels looking more like the real thing. I just used a silver Sharpie to paint the outer sections of the wheels, and they look a lot better with this detail added. The windows on these old AMT MPC 3rd Gen Firebird and Camaro kits aren't the best fit in my opinion. They're not too bad, but it always seems like the T-tops especially don't really want to sit flat on the body, so you've really got to glue them in securely all the way around so there isn't a huge gap. Not the cleanest gluing job, I must admit, but they're in. The scanner light went in next. Once again, that was kind of a pain to get installed exactly where I wanted. I ended up needing to use a ton of glue, but it's in along with the interior. Here's something that was easy to do for a change. I got a pretty good looking smoke taillight effect like what you see on the real kit just from using a black Sharpie marker. I used a silver Sharpie to back the taillights. It looks better in person than it does here on camera, but that ended up being a very simple and fast way to get the appearance that I wanted. I used a chrome pen to paint the mirrors. When the glue on the scanner light finally dried, I did my best to glue all of the wires to the underside of the hood and made sure that they wouldn't get in the way of the front body mount or any of the electronics. Remember those body posts and magnets that I glued to the chassis earlier? Well, I glued the upper magnets to the underside of the body. Once the glue dries, the upper magnets are secured in place on the underside of the body, so now the body can be removed or mounted very easily. I did need to glue on a few scrap pieces of plastic in between some of the magnets to act as shims so the body will sit level. With the body mounted, I glued on the final parts that you see here. If I can, I always like to install things like spoilers or mirrors last, so that way I don't have to worry about them breaking off while working on the body. Finally, I soldered on a little connector for the front scanner lights. This connector will allow the body to be completely removable from the chassis simply by unplugging it, and it allows the option to drive the car without the scanner light being on. The scanner is powered by the same 2S LiPo battery that powers the ESC. To finish the car, I painted and installed a set of tailpipes that were included with the chassis kit. And with those on, the car is now complete. This build may not have been the easiest, but in the end it turned out looking great. That front scanner light ended up being a nice touch and really helps add an extra bit of detail to the car. I wasn't sure how well that blacked out rear window and walled off interior would work out, but I think it blends in pretty well and allows plenty of room for the battery. Of course, I can't conclude the build without doing some driving. I had a lot of fun displaying this car at USTE, an eye-catcher for sure, and thanks to Brad from RC Supremacy for having this great micro track setup for all us guys with small-scale on-road vehicles. All around a nice model of an iconic car ready to hit the small-scale streets. Be sure to check out the links below in the description if you're interested in doing a similar build. As always, a big thanks to all of our Patreon members who help make this content possible. If you'd like to support this channel and get access to some exclusive perks such as STL files, the link to our Patreon page is below as well. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.